All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the brilliant narrative mechanics of the opening chapters of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. We're going to unpack exactly how the author introduces a completely hidden magical world, but does it through this incredibly unexpected lens of stubborn, aggressive normalcy. So let's kick this off with a bit of a weird question. What is your absolute greatest fear? Seriously, think about it for a second. I want you to imagine a life where you are trying so incredibly hard to be perfectly, undeniably normal, so absolutely desperate to fit into the quiet, sterile suburbs that your biggest anxiety in life isn't what you'd typically expect. It's not financial ruin, it's not some terrible disease. And this hits on the sheer absurdity of the Dursleys of number 4 Privet Drive. Their ultimate terror, literally the thing that keeps them up at night, is simply that their neighbors might discover Mrs. Dursley's secret sister, Mrs. Potter. It's this pathological, almost comical fear of their own relatives, simply because the Potters are as un-Dursleyish as it is humanly possible to be. This establishes such a fascinating psychological weight right out of the gate, framing magic not as this wondrous, beautiful discovery, but as a hostile intrusion. Which brings us to Section 1, Weaponized, Normalcy, and Denial. You know what's actually wild here is how the narrative constructs this desperate, fortress-like desire for a perfectly normal reality, starting right with the physical descriptions. Think about Mr. Dursley. He's this heavy, totally inflexible director of a firm that makes drills, and he's perfectly contrasted with his wife. Mrs. Dursley is thin, blonde, and has nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which honestly she practically uses as a neighborhood surveillance system, constantly craning over garden fences to spy on people. Together, they have built an absolute fortress of mundane life. Let's track how this completely unravels on what's supposed to be just a dull, gray Tuesday. The pacing here is beautiful. First, an owl flutters past the window in the morning, a tiny crack in the facade that we, the readers, see before the characters even do. Then, on his commute, Mr. Dursley spots a tabby cat literally reading a map. By the time he's in town, there are strangely dressed people walking around in cloaks, and this spectacularly escalates by the evening, leading up to the local weathermen and newscasters reporting nationwide daytime owls and a sudden, bizarre downpour of shooting stars instead of rain. The magical world is basically throwing a planet-wide party, and Privet Drive is just desperately trying to close the blinds. So, the absolutely crucial point here is how Mr. Dursley reacts to all of this. He engages in what is basically weaponized cognitive dissonance. When he sees that cat reading the map, he doesn't gasp in wonder. He actively gives himself a little shake and chooses to think about drills. He deliberately suppresses the magic. It's exactly, and I mean exactly, akin to a driver slapping a piece of black duct tape over a glowing check engine light on their dashboard. If you can't see the warning, well, everything must be fine, right? He retreats so deeply into his own denial that he even tries to convince himself his nephew might actually be named Harvey or Harold. Moving right along to Section 2, A Shift in Power. But here's the thing about narrative energy. You just cannot suppress it forever. The story logically has to shift to the night, where the mundane rules completely disappear and the magical authorities take over. Albus Dumbledore's arrival on the corner is so cinematic, yet totally silent. Visually, he is an absolute affront to Mr. Dursley's boring gray-tie worldview. He's tall, rocking a sweeping purple cloak and high-heeled buckled boots, but it's his very first action that really sets the tone. He clicks a silver put-outer 12 times, quietly dismantling the artificial streetlights of the mundane world. He systematically plunges Privet Drive into darkness, just so he can debrief with Professor McGonagall, who, by the way, has just transformed from that map-reading tabby cat, about the survival of baby Harry. And this leads us to an incredibly heavy exposition drop, which is anchored entirely in character dynamics. Addressing McGonagall's very valid fears about leaving a famous magical child with magic-loathing muggles, who literally despise what he is, Dumbledore makes a choice. It is an incredibly cold but totally calculated and pragmatic choice to protect Harry from the burden of early fame. He essentially decides it is better to trade a happy childhood for a grounded ego, keeping Harry entirely away from a world where he'd be famous for something he can't even remember. And right as they resolve this harsh decision, the delivery system arrives. Hagrid literally crashes into the pristine suburbs on a borrowed flying motorcycle from Sirius Black. He is a complete sensory overload compared to the sterile streets of Little Winning. I mean, the guy is twice as tall and 5 times as wide as a normal man, with hands the size of trash can lids and boots that look like baby dolphins. He represents the raw, untamed heart of the magical world, dropping off the boy who lived with nothing but a letter and a lightning bolt scar before just flying back up into the night. And that brilliantly sets up Section 3, the pressure cooker. This brings us to the core tension of our explainer. We jump from that mythical handoff straight into the brutal, everyday reality of Dumbledore's decision. 10. The narrative violently skips ahead 10 years, revealing a completely miserable environment. The outside of Privet Drive looks exactly the same, but inside, Harry lives in a dark, spider-infested cupboard beneath the stairs. He's drowning in Dudley's massive hand-me-downs, his glasses are taped together, but more importantly, he is living under the central, oppressive doctrine of the Dursley household: don't ask questions. They are basically engaging in a systematic campaign to beat and starve the magic right out of him. But here's the catch. If magic is an innate energy, and the Dursleys are essentially taking a pressure cooker, turning the heat all the way up, and duct taping the lid shut, the laws of narrative thermodynamics demand that this magic is going to involuntarily vent. It has to go somewhere. We call this punished magic. It acts as a raw, almost feral defense mechanism, triggered to protect Harry's dignity against domestic abuse or deep humiliation, even though he gets punished for it every single time it happens. We see this drama response super clearly in the flashbacks. When Aunt Petunia almost completely shaves his head just to hide his scar, magic steps in and regrows his badly shorn hair overnight, totally saving him from a humiliating day at school. When she tries to force him into this absolutely revolting brown sweater with orange puffballs, the magic physically alters the object, shrinking it down to the size of a hand puppet. And when he's running for his life from Dudley's bullying gang, he inexplicably teleports right up to the school kitchen roof. All right, Section 4, the vanishing glass. Because the Dursleys' suppression tactics are relentless and totally unforgiving, this explosive energy eventually demands a much larger, very public release. To really set the scene and highlight the sheer absurd inequity of Harry's environment before they leave for the zoo, Dudley throws a massive tantrum. Why? Simply because receiving 36 birthday presents is 2 fewer than the previous year. 36. And right before they walk out the door, Uncle Vernon gets his purple face right up close to Harry and threatens that any funny business means he'll be rocked in his cupboard until Christmas. He is desperately trying to enforce the mundane laws of physics onto a child who naturally defies them. Now look at this striking thematic parallel here. Once they get into the reptile house, Harry feels this genuine, profound empathy for a captive boa constrictor. He realizes that living in a tank with people drumming on the glass all day is actually in some ways worse than his cupboard. It's a perfect mirror image. Both are totally isolated from their true homes, both are trapped behind glass, and both are constantly bothered by bullies. And it's this shared, deep isolation that triggers the magic in a completely new way. They actually begin to converse. But of course, the mundane world always intrudes, doesn't it? Dudley sees what's happening, waddles over, and violently punches Harry, knocking him hard onto the concrete floor. That violent intrusion is the exact spark. It's the moment the magical pressure cooker explodes. The magic reacts defensively on a massive scale, causing the tank's glass to completely vanish. Just poof, gone. As absolute chaos erupts and people are screaming, the snake casually slithers free, leaving Harry with a quiet hissing, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." So, what's the vital takeaway from this entire sequence? Well, the vanishing glass actually functions as the central metaphor for the whole story. Despite Uncle Vernon's endless threats and the inevitable cupboard punishments, the barrier between Harry and his true nature is incredibly fragile. The separation between the normal and the magical, it's just an illusion that is entirely destined to shatter. Magic at its core simply cannot be contained. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Embracing Your Scars. If we applied these brilliant narrative mechanics to our own lives, it's really time to examine where you might be forcing yourself to fit into a rigid, perfectly normal Privet Drive mold. Are you putting black tape over your own check engine light to avoid dealing with your shifting reality? Circling back to that midnight exposition drop on the brick wall, remember when Professor McGonagall asked if Dumbledore could magically heal the lightning bolt cut on baby Harry's forehead? Dumbledore outright refuses. He says, "Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in handy." He even casually mentions that he himself has a scar above his left knee that forms a perfect map of the London Underground. Meanwhile, the Dursleys spent 10 years treating Harry's scar as a defect, as something shameful to be covered up just to maintain their illusion of normalcy. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over today. Where in your life are you ignoring your own flying motorcycles? What if we viewed our own scars not as deformities to be hidden away, but as vital, permanent maps? What if the perceived flaws you're desperately trying to hide from the neighbors are actually the ultimate guide toward your true potential and your own magical identity? Keep questioning the ordinary, everyone, and always keep looking for the vanishing glass.